Hi there, my name is John Robert Mack, and I'm just this guy. Let's talk about God. This particular video is my first in the series, and what I'm doing here is I'm letting you know how I came into the study of early Christianity and quote unquote the historical Jesus, etc. Because I've read a bunch of books and watched a lot of videos, and a lot of folks spend a lot of time talking about their history. So I'm giving it to you once here in this video, and then I will try to never speak of it again. Back in 96, 97, 1996, 1997, if that needs to be said, I was living in Austin, Texas with my brother, who was a gymnastics coach. And he came home one day, sort of frantic, and said, I need Bible verses about being gay. I'm going to switch over to the word queer because I like it better, but again, this was 96, so that's not the word we use then. He worked at a place that was quite religious, and they were having a meeting where folks were saying, is it okay to talk about Jesus on the gymnastics floor? And the consensus of the owners was, well, if this is something you feel strongly about, you should be allowed to discuss it. And so my brother, being my brother and probably one of the most supportive people I've known about the whole queer thing, said, well, I'm very in favor of queer rights. Can I talk about that on the gymnastics floor? And, well, that caused issues. So he wanted actual biblical verses to be able to combat his coworkers and the business owners. And so I started to research. And I grew up Northern Baptist, which is not the same as Southern Baptist, and I had a pretty decent working knowledge of the Bible. But when I went sort of deep diving into studying the whole concept of homosexuality and the Bible, and homosexuality in the Bible is not the same thing as being queer in the Bible. And at the time, I was looking at homosexuality. So I did a lot of reading, and I realized that an awful lot was not what we had learned, and that the Bible said a lot of things people don't realize it says, and that it doesn't say a whole lot of the things that people think it does say, which was interesting to me. And then we had some friends over, and I was talking about all these things that Jesus believed that would not be popular at that time and would be less popular today. And a friend of mine said, if Jesus ever actually did come back, he'd probably get the electric chair. And it was an epiphany. I realized that would be an interesting story. What happened if Jesus did come back and he wasn't what people expected, and so he was executed again? And the execution is an entirely different topic for an entirely different video. But the truth is, it started the entire ball rolling. I got the idea of what would happen if Jesus came back and had to deal with the state of the Christian church as it existed at that point. And again, it's even worse today, in my humble opinion. And at that time, in the mid-90s, someone had cloned a sheep, Dolly. And so there was a whole lot of excitement over the idea that humans could be cloned as mammals. Right? They cloned a mammal. Since then, they've cloned some cats. But at the time, it was exciting. And to be honest, there were several other novels at that time that were very quickly written and published about the idea of a clone of Jesus. But most of them talked about the plight of the mother and kind of ended where Jesus was born. And there may be some that I missed, but I didn't see any. And so my concept was, what would it be like to be essentially Jesus in the modern age, dealing with a Christian church that would persecute you? And keeping in mind, I wrote the rough draft of the first novel, The Gospel of John. I wrote the first draft in like 1996 to 2000. I published the first edition of it in 2015. And so a whole lot of the ideas I had didn't really apply then. To be honest, my goal at the time was to help people remember World War II didn't just come out of nowhere. And I wrote the first draft during the Clinton administration, published the second draft during Obama, when liberals all thought we had a pretty good time of it and things were on a predestination to a better land. And then Trump happened. And so when I wrote the first edition, it was with the idea of, you know, it happened in Germany. It could happen again. Don't get too complacent. And in 2016, we found out that I was right. We found out then in 2024 that I was way more right than I ever had any right to be. And so I completed a second edition. I've changed none of the content except like grammar, wording, things like that. But we live in a time when people have weaponized the Bible. And people have weaponized the Bible for like literally a couple of thousand years. But it's becoming worse right now. And so my hope is that with discussion and dialogue and even friendly debate, maybe we can find out a little bit more about what the Bible actually said. And so this whole page, everything, this whole idea is meant to help people understand maybe the Bible doesn't say what some people think it said. And to help folks who know the Bible didn't say those things, to give them some debate material. Also, to make sure we all know, I'm going to probably get a whole bunch of atheists who say the Bible is bullshit, and so why are we talking about it at all? Well, you know, like millions of people believe it. And so regardless of what I believe or what anyone else believes, it is a huge influence on our culture. And I think the more we understand about it, the better those of us who don't just want to like kill everyone, the better off we'll be.